Hi, I'm Verena. They erased my name from the guest list, told me I could sit near the kitchen. My dress? Mocked? My presence? Tolerated? And my mother-in-law? She smirked like I was some stray they couldn't quite shoo away, but what they didn't know was that the man they thought I lost, the one they tried to replace me for, was about to walk in and change everything. You ever been humiliated so quietly it echoed for years? Stick around, because tonight, the silence ended, then cut to MC line. Before we dive in, let us know, what time are you listening to this and where from? Drop a comment. I read every one. The message had come through a group text, but not directly to me. Veronica had forwarded it to Logan's sister, then added, just making sure everyone relevant has the info. No names, no "Hi Verena." No invitation, technically, just a clipped, sterile note about a casual family evening at the club. She didn't even specify what for. I almost didn't go, but Logan said, "It's probably Aunt Jackie's birthday. Just show up, play nice." So I did. I wore a cream blouse, long sleeves with soft pleats, and a tailored navy skirt. Clean, simple, respectful. A gold pendant around my neck, my wedding band, a light touch of blush. I looked appropriate. The sun was starting to dip behind the trees as I parked in front of the Stonebridge Country Club. The drive up had been quiet. Too quiet, just the hum of tires and that building feeling I always get before I enter one of their spaces. I stepped out, straightened my skirt, and walked in. At the front desk, the concierge barely glanced at me before asking, "And you are?" Verena Carter," I said gently. "I believe I'm with the family event in the West Lounge." He typed something, frowned, typed again. "There's a Carter party in the Lakeside room, but your name isn't listed." I felt the breath tighten in my chest. A voice rang out behind me, bright and sharp. "Oh, she's not on the list? Just let her in. She's family, technically." Veronica. She glided forward, in a midnight blue cocktail dress that shimmered under the chandelier light. Her heels tapped against the marble like punctuation marks. She gave me that practiced, pinched smile she always used when she wanted to look benevolent in public. As I walked in beside her, I could already feel the stares. The hush, the shimmer of satin, velvet, diamond-studded necklines. Every woman in the room looked like they'd just stepped out of a fashion spread. Black tie formality, not brunch. I glanced down at my outfit and tried not to blink too fast. One of the older women, I think it was Aunt Genevieve, leaned into the woman beside her and said with a breathy chuckle, maybe she thought this was a retirement brunch. I pretended not to hear. That was something I'd mastered in this family. They seated me at a round table near the kitchen. "Just temporary," Veronica said with a too-sweet voice. "We're waiting for a few RSVPs. The table was near the swinging doors, where servers hustled in and out with trays of hors d'oeuvres and clinking glasses. No one else was seated there. I placed my clutch on the table, then folded the burgundy napkin across my lap. It was soft, expensive linen, but it reminded me of the old diner I worked at in high school. Burgundy napkins and heavy plates. A waiter passed with a tray of champagne flutes. He reached toward me, then hesitated. "Oh, this tray is reserved." I gave him a nod. No smile. He moved on. A few seats away, Veronica sipped her drink and then, without even looking at me, said to her friend, "Billionaires don't dine by the kitchen. But hey, at least she showed up. That's something." I should have left. That would have been the healthy thing. But I stayed. I always stayed. When someone asked where Logan was, I gave the soft answer I'd prepared on the way here. "He's finishing a board meeting. He might drop by." Veronica's smirk was instant. "Sure," she said, eyes glinting. "Of course. I'm sure he'll pull up any second now in his helicopter and whisk you off to wherever people dine with interns." The room chuckled. The burgundy napkin in my lap grew heavier. I let my gaze drift to the window, to the trees swaying in the fading golden light. This had happened before. After Logan and I got married, the shift came slowly. Whispers, missed group messages, polite detachment. But when he refused to sign over his trust fund into his mother's name, the mask slipped. That was when they stopped pretending. I remembered the first Thanksgiving I spent with them. Logan's mom, Jacqueline, had looked me over like a lost UPS delivery and said to Logan, "She's got a nice voice. Reminds me of that intern you had in New York." Then she turned to me and added, "Though that one was prettier." And somehow, I still baked the pies that year. Now, as laughter rippled around the room, I stared at the untouched dessert plate in front of me, something sculpted and overly sweet, just like everything else here. Then the double doors opened, the room froze, high heels paused mid-step, wine glasses clinked to a halt. All heads turned, some in confusion, others in disbelief. Logan, he walked in like he belonged in the center of the world. Tailored suit, slate gray tie, calm, unreadable face. He didn't glance at Veronica, didn't nod at his mother. He just walked, past tables, past whispering aunts, straight toward me, and then without a word, he pulled out the chair beside me, where the napkins still sat untouched. He sat down like it was the only seat that ever mattered. No pause, no glance around the room, just the quiet rustle of his tailored suit as he settled into the chair beside me, the one they'd placed next to the kitchen doors, as if I were someone's forgotten coat instead of his wife. His hand reached for the folded burgundy napkin still lying untouched on the linen. He opened it slowly, laid it across his lap, then turned just enough to look at me. No words, just a look that said, "I see you." Around us, the hush stretched too long. Silverware stilled midair. A few coughs, a clink of glass, someone's awkward laugh, too loud, too high. But the silence remained, heavy and thick. Veronica, ever the actress, finally found her voice. "Logan!" she exclaimed, lips tight in a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "You weren't supposed to be in town yet." He reached for his water, calm as ever. Plans changed. Then, after a beat, with just enough weight, where else would I sit but with my wife? The word wife hit like a gong in a cathedral. Celeste, his mother, sitting at the head table beneath a cascade of white orchids, raised a single, perfectly manicured brow. Her voice sliced across the room like a knife wrapped in silk. "We had a seat reserved for you up here, darling." Logan didn't look her way. "The guest list didn't include Verena's name," he said, setting his glass down without a sound. "So I figured your table wasn't for us." Us, not her. Us. That word landed harder than anything else. There was a sudden rustle of movement, one of the junior staffers appearing at Logan's elbow, wide-eyed and clearly terrified. "Sir, if you'd like, we can move you both to—" "No," Logan said, soft but firm, without looking up. "We're fine here." The staffer nodded quickly and disappeared like a vapor. People tried to resume conversation after that, pretending nothing had happened. But the mood was cracked. Fractured. You could feel the heat of shifting eyes, the clumsy forks missing plates, the strained laughter at the next table that didn't sound like laughter at all. And yet he just ate. Calm. Methodical. As if this were any other Thursday night dinner. His quiet presence drew every ounce of tension toward us, then diffused it with his indifference. I didn't speak. I just sat still, spine straight, hands folded. I kept my eyes on the water glass in front of me and let myself feel the shock washing through me in quiet, careful waves. Not from what Logan had done, but because of what it meant. He chose this chair that Veronica and Aunt Genevieve had so deliberately selected for me when they thought he wouldn't come. The one by the server's corridor, the one they'd hoped I'd either complain about or shrink into invisibility beside. But he sat here, with me, as if it were the only seat that made sense, and that, more than any raised voice or slammed glass, rewrote the entire evening. As dessert was being passed around, towers of raspberry tarts and hazelnut mousse, I caught movement to my right. Aunt Genevieve, bending slightly toward Veronica, lips nearly brushing her niece's ear. "I told you," she hissed, not as quietly as she thought. "You should have confirmed with his office." "I did," Veronica snapped back under her breath. His assistant said Milan. Genevieve's reply was a grim hum. Well, he's not in Milan. He's here. And this changes everything. I kept my face neutral, but inside something began to click. Not with rage, not even grief. Just a slow, settling certainty. This was never a misunderstanding. Never a mistake. They'd meant to exclude me. A week earlier, I'd walked into the sunroom at Celeste's estate just as Veronica was finishing a call, something about headcount and non-disruptive seating. Then came that line. I'd remembered it instantly, even though I hadn't understood it fully until now. We need her quiet. This isn't about her. I hadn't realized then that the her was me. Now, sitting at that table, watching Veronica's frozen smile and the rigid way Celeste cut her dessert, it became clear. This whole event was designed to reset the power dynamic, to remind me I was an outsider, that I didn't belong. But they hadn't counted on Logan showing up, or worse, for them, choosing the wrong seat. I didn't make a scene, I didn't throw my napkin down or call anyone out. That wasn't my style. They wanted me to be emotional, impulsive, reactionary, something they could spin. Instead, halfway through the course, I stood, quietly, smoothed my skirt, picked up my clutch. I walked toward the restroom, every step deliberate. No one spoke, but I felt their eyes on my back like heat from a fire you don't dare touch. Inside, the light was too bright, too perfect. My reflection looked composed, even serene. But I leaned toward the mirror anyway, until my breath fogged the glass just slightly, and then I whispered, "Let them see what dignity looks like." The door opened gently behind me. I didn't turn. I knew the scent of his cologne. "You okay?" Logan asked. "I'm fine." A pause. "You ready to leave?" I looked at him through the mirror. He looked tired. Not from work, but from something deeper. From watching his family undo the very thing he'd spent years trying to protect. "No," I said quietly. "I'm ready to stay." Another pause. This one longer. "And watch." He nodded once. Said nothing. Just stepped aside and opened the door for me as I walked past him and out of the restroom. We didn't go back to our table right away. We paused at the hallway's end, beside the tall potted fiddle fig that shielded us from view. From there, I could see the room. The way Veronica leaned forward, whispering frantically to Aunt Genevieve. The way Celeste looked pointedly toward the empty chairs, her lips pressed into a line. I waited for the music to shift, for the servers to clear the dessert plates, for just the right moment. And then I stepped back into that ballroom, but this time I didn't just return, I made sure they couldn't look away. I didn't rush. I didn't pause either. I simply walked, one foot in front of the other, past the ice sculptures and tiered cakes, past glittering chandeliers that hadn't dimmed one bit, though everything else in that room had changed. I could feel it. The air was thicker now. People didn't talk quite as loud. Their smiles strained at the corners. I didn't look around for Logan. I didn't need to. I knew he'd be watching. And when I reached our little table by the kitchen doors, still there, still slightly wobbly, I pulled out my chair and sat down. He was already waiting. A fresh glass of water was in front of me, napkin folded neatly where I'd left it. Logan gave a small nod, one I returned without words. That was our thing, no theatrics, no need to prove anything to the room. But the room noticed anyway. The music had resumed, soft jazz drifting over crystal and silverware, but it was all background now. Something had cracked earlier, and they couldn't patch it up with wine and string instruments. The illusion was over. People could pretend, but they couldn't not know anymore. From across the floor, I caught Veronica leaning into a cousin's ear, her lips moving fast, probably explaining why Logan had shown up early, or maybe trying to paint me as manipulative again. Didn't matter. She could scramble all she wanted now. That version of me, the silent, grateful sister-in-law, was gone. At our table, a quiet voice piped up. "I was hoping you'd come back." I turned to my right and blinked. Great Aunt Bet. She must have slipped in while I was gone. Her cane rested beside her chair, and her lips curved into a knowing smile. Her hair was a soft cloud of gray, her pearls slightly mismatched. She didn't look like much, but in this family she'd once caused a rift so deep they stopped inviting her to holidays. All because she'd fallen in love with a man named David who just happened to be Episcopalian. "To women who keep standing where they were told to disappear," she said softly, raising her glass. I met her toast without a word and clinked gently. So did Logan. Nobody else at our table dared interrupt. The moment was quiet, but it was sharp, like a thread weaving between generations. One woman quietly surviving the snubs of this family, handing the baton to another. Then came the snickering. Behind us, I heard the unmistakable sound of someone trying too hard not to laugh. I didn't turn around, but the voice carried just enough. "If you dress like help, you'll be treated like help," someone whispered, loud enough for the words to float past the floral centerpieces. I recognized Veronica's tone, sweet and venomous. A few chairs over, a cousin who hadn't spoken to me in years was smirking down at her phone. She tilted it ever so slightly, the glow of a photo unmistakable. I saw her tag something on Instagram and then pass it to someone else. I didn't need to ask. My secondhand clutch, resting on the table, had been the subject. Hashtag, "one underdressed wife, probably." Logan's jaw twitched. He didn't say a word, but I knew he saw it too. I reached for my glass and drank slowly. I didn't rise to the bait. You see, I used to think silence was safety, that if I just stayed polite, just kept my head down, they'd tire themselves out, that if I didn't react, I wouldn't be a target. But there's a point where silence becomes permission, and I was done giving it. My phone vibrated lightly against my clutch. I picked it up and glanced at the message. "Escrow cleared, all documents signed. You now hold 62% voting control of Grayson Properties." I stared at the screen for a long moment, my thumb hovering above the reply button. Grayson Properties, the pride of Veronica's father, a company with their name etched on every plaque and every real estate award in the state. A company I'd slowly, quietly been acquiring shares in for 3 years, through subsidiaries, through patient buyouts, through long nights when Logan was on business trips and I was running projections in my bathrobe. No one in this room knew. Not yet. And now I owned it, not in name, but in power. Logan leaned over slightly. "Everything okay?" I locked the screen and smiled just enough. "Everything's perfect." He didn't push. He never did. And maybe that's why I loved him, because in a world that demanded I explain myself, he simply stood beside me. The jazz music shifted. A slow, classic Ella Fitzgerald tune floated across the room. People were beginning to relax again, or trying to. The open bar helped. I could hear the clink of a whiskey bottle behind me and soft laughter returning to some corners. But I didn't move. I watched. I observed the family I'd married into, the little glances, the half-smiles, the way they flinched when I caught their eyes. Veronica's fiancé shifted uncomfortably at the main table, his eyes darting toward me, then away. Celeste was frowning, stabbing at her dessert like it had personally offended her. They didn't know what was coming. I didn't want revenge. That's not why I bought in. I didn't need their titles or their approval. What I needed, what I demanded now, was to never be erased again. I'd spent so long trying to make space for myself quietly, but now I was done with whispers. I didn't need to shout, but I'd make sure they heard me all the same. Aunt Bet reached for her cane and stood slowly. Logan instinctively helped steady her. As she shuffled away, she looked back at me with a wink. "Let the shadows keep talking, dear. Just make sure they talk about the right thing tomorrow." I smiled and nodded once. Then I checked my phone again. The screen lit up with a second message. This one from my assistant. "Media deck approved. Board meeting with press begins 9 a.m. sharp. You're listed as chairwoman." I didn't reply, just locked the screen and placed the phone back in my bag. I looked up from my seat, took in the chandeliers, the polished silver, the artificial smiles, and for the first time that evening, I smiled too. Because tomorrow, their world would begin to shift. The light coming through the blinds wasn't kind, it was honest. It highlighted every paper on my desk, every silent decision that had waited for me overnight. I hadn't slept much, not out of nerves, but out of a quiet, humming readiness. I sat with my coffee still steaming beside me and opened the drawer I rarely touched. Buried beneath old property ledgers and notes from conferences I never had the time to attend was a cream-colored envelope. Unmarked, sealed in wax. I ran my finger along the seam, then cracked it open. Inside was his handwriting. Logan's father wrote in tight, neat cursive like it was still 1962. "Verena," it began. "If you're reading this, then either I've passed or the people I used to trust have forced your hand. Either way, the legacy doesn't belong to cowards who cling to last names. It belongs to someone who can build something lasting. Someone like you." I blinked, swallowing hard. The second paper folded behind the letter was a single-page legal document. Title: Grayson Properties. Contingency clause. And my name was typed right under the word successor. I stood there motionless for several seconds before finally lowering the pages onto the desk. The clause was simple but sharp. If the current board failed compliance checks, or if there was evidence of manipulation or mismanagement, the successor listed would be entitled to initiate a leadership review, effective within 24 hours of activation. My signature would trigger it, and I already held the majority. I leaned back in the chair, the wheels creaking softly. For a long while, I stared at the sunlight as it moved across the floor, and then I thought back to the last conversation I had with Logan's father before his stroke. We were in the garden behind their house, pruning rose bushes of all things. He handed me a pair of gloves and said, "You've got patience I never had, the kind that builds, not just survives." At the time, I thought it was just a compliment. Now I realized it was a quiet nod, his way of handing the torch without drawing too much attention. He'd watched his wife and daughter bicker over money and power for years. He knew what kind of storm was coming, and instead of fueling it, he set up a backdoor for someone who had learned to navigate quietly. I glanced at the time. It was just after 8 a.m. I had 1 hour to get downtown. Filing the documents into a slim portfolio, I smoothed my blouse. Yes, the same one they all whispered about last night. I hadn't changed. I didn't need to, because I hadn't come this far just to play dress-up for people who only respected glitter. By 8:40, I was sitting in the office of Mr. Calhoun, the family's longtime attorney. His walls were still paneled in dark wood, his office smelling like old books and slow decisions. He reviewed the document with quiet precision, nodding more than he spoke. Then he looked up. "You're activating it?" "Yes," I said simply. He took out a fresh pen. "Verena, you understand what this means?" "I do." He passed me the pen and I signed without hesitation. When he sealed the file and pressed his thumbprint onto the corner for authentication, he finally looked me in the eye. "Effective 9 a.m. tomorrow. You're not just a majority shareholder anymore. You're the chairwoman." I felt the weight of those words, but not as a burden, as proof. I didn't grin. I didn't cry. I just nodded. "Thank you." Logan didn't know yet. I wasn't keeping it from him, but this wasn't something I was going to drop over coffee. I wanted it to come from me, when the time was right, not from a press release or a boardroom whisper. Back at home, I stood in front of the hallway mirror. The lines under my eyes showed. I'd barely touched my makeup. My outfit still smelled faintly of last night's perfume and banquet food. I looked tired. But more than that, I looked solid, grounded. I touched the glass. "They didn't mock my clothes," I murmured. "They mocked the fact I stayed grounded while they floated." For a moment, I thought about changing into something more formal, more fitting of what was coming. But then I shook my head. Let them see me exactly like this, because I never stopped becoming. As I turned back to the kitchen, my phone buzzed. "Logan," I answered. "Morning." He didn't waste time. "Mom's making noise about some kind of legacy campaign. She's already got Veronica's team drafting a rebrand for Grayson. They're planning a public announcement, press release and all." I stirred my coffee. "When?" "Noon. Today." I took a slow breath. Tell her to hold the press release, Ma, just until noon." There was a pause on the other end. "Why?" "Because things might look a little different by then." Logan was silent. Then he said, "Verena, are you doing something I should know about?" "I'm doing something I've earned the right to do, and I'll tell you everything, but not over the phone." He hesitated again, but finally said, "Okay." After we hung up, I walked back to the desk and picked up the letter one more time. "You trusted me," I whispered, running my finger over Logan's father's signature. "I won't waste that." Then I looked up from my phone, and for the first time that morning, I smiled. For when noon came, I would walk into that boardroom, not as someone's wife, but as the woman they all tried to erase. The air outside Grayson Holdings was thick with the kind of June humidity that clings to your skin no matter how pressed your suit is. But inside that glass tower, the chill wasn't from the air conditioning. It was from the tension waiting behind those polished mahogany doors. I adjusted the cuffs of my charcoal blazer, smoothed the hem of my skirt, and pushed the boardroom door open. Every pair of eyes turned toward me. Frances sat at the head of the long, gleaming table, one manicured hand resting on a stack of printed agendas, the other curled possessively around her teacup. Veronica was seated to her right, flipping through pages she clearly hadn't read. They had started without me. I walked in without announcing myself. I didn't need to. A few board members blinked in surprise. One older gentleman, Mr. Ridley, I remembered, cleared his throat but didn't speak. Frances, mid-sentence, halted. Her lips formed a tight line and her gaze narrowed. "I wasn't aware we invited guests today," she said, smooth but brittle. "I'm not a guest," I said simply. I placed a navy folder onto the center of the table. "I'm here to assume interim chair responsibilities per Section 3.8 of the Contingency Trust." Frances gave a quiet laugh, the kind people use when they think they still have control. "This is nonsense. Logan is the heir, and I'm acting chair in his absence." The doors behind me opened again. Mr. Calhoun, the family's legal counsel, stepped in, his presence calm, deliberate. He didn't bother with greetings, just walked forward, opened the folder I'd placed, and began reading. "By order of the late Thomas Grayson, and according to the stipulations of the Contingency Trust executed on March 8, 2019, the majority shares transfer effective immediately to Mrs. Verena Grayson, contingent upon non-compliance findings within the board's operations." He paused and looked up. "Such findings were submitted and verified last week. The clause is now active." A stunned silence swept across the room. Frances sat motionless, her teacup still hovering mid-air. Veronica blinked, clearly not following. "This must be a misunderstanding," Frances finally said, voice straining. "Thomas would never—" "He did," Calhoun interrupted gently. "He prepared for the possibility that leadership might fall into the wrong hands." Frances's hand trembled. She set the cup down, too hard. "You think you can just waltz in here, wave a piece of paper, and erase us?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "No, I'm not erasing you. You already tried to erase me. I'm just rewriting the registry." A low murmur ran through the room. One board member, a soft-spoken man I'd seen at company retreats, spoke up. "Thomas always said you had the clearest mind in the family. I wondered why he never promoted Veronica." "Guess now we know." Veronica bristled. "This is temporary. Logan will fix it." I turned to her, my voice calm. "Logan resigned from the board last week, on my advice." Frances's face drained of color. Veronica stared open-mouthed. "You're lying." "I'm not," I said. "You can call him, but he won't pick up. He's in Denver, working on an independent investment fund that doesn't involve this circus." The silence that followed was deafening. Frances stood suddenly, her voice shrill. "This is a betrayal." "No," I replied. "This is a consequence." I took a breath, then reached for the second envelope in my briefcase. "Effective today, I'm ordering an internal audit of the executive accounts, starting with the Charitable Trust for International Legacy, the one you and Veronica manage offshore." Frances's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I'm not doing this out of spite. I'm doing this because the company deserves to be led without entitlement. Without cruelty. You've spent years cutting people down who didn't bow to your ego. Another board member, a woman I didn't recognize but who looked like she'd sat through far too many of Francis's power plays, nodded slowly. "It's about time," she murmured. I gave a small nod of thanks and closed the folder. No one stopped me as I turned and walked toward the door. Just before I reached it, a young assistant, no older than 25, stepped forward and opened it for me. His name tag read, Jace. "Mrs. Grayson," he said politely, holding the door wide. I stopped, turned, and smiled. "No, just Verena is fine, but thank you." As I stepped into the hallway, my pulse steady, my mind clear, I felt something shift, not just in the company, but in me. I had spent years trying to be enough for their world. Now I was no longer asking for space. I had taken it, but just when I thought they couldn't stoop any lower, Francis found another way to humiliate me. I got home just before the sky dimmed to dusk. The penthouse was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't soothe but amplifies what you're holding inside. I slipped off my heels by the door, placed my keys in the tray like always, and looked around the apartment. The glass walls still shimmered from the fading light over the city, but the warmth that used to greet me, it had vanished somewhere between Logan's increasing absences and the family's venom dressed in manners. I was heading to the kitchen when the intercom buzzed. I wasn't expecting anyone. "Delivery for Mrs. Grayson." I hesitated at the title. "Send it up," I said, even though a part of me whispered not to. The elevator dinged a few minutes later, and a young man wheeled in a large, expensive-looking white box. No flowers on the outside, no branding, just a fine satin ribbon tied in a perfect bow. I thanked him, tipped more than I should have, and waited until he was gone before I opened it. Inside was an explosion of crushed petals, pink roses, white orchids, twisted stems, torn leaves. Some still held the perfume of the night before. Others had turned brown at the edges. Lying atop the mess was a handwritten envelope, cream-colored, thick stock. My name in a sharp, slanted hand I recognized immediately. Francis. I pulled out the card and unfolded it. "Since you wore the wrong color and embarrassed the family, we assumed you wouldn't mind covering this misstep. Kindly remit $17,540 for the floral arrangements. Invoice enclosed." The invoice was indeed there. Neat itemization. Signed. I just stood there, staring. For a moment, I didn't even feel angry, just hollow. Like the part of me that used to be shocked by Francis had given up reacting. I sat down on the floor next to the box and stared at the petals, crushed, discarded, but once meant to impress. It felt too fitting. I picked one up, then another. And without really thinking, I started separating the ones still intact from the ones beyond saving. It became rhythmic, meditative even. My hands moved and my mind wandered. I reached for my phone. Logan hadn't texted. I typed, "Did you know about this? About the flowers?" I waited. Nothing. I typed again. "Are you still in Boston?" 3 dots blinked, then disappeared, then came back. Finally, "Yes. Tied up here. I'll call you later." That was it. No. "I'm sorry." No. "Are you okay?" I put the phone down. It was in that silence that my other phone rang, the one I rarely used. The number lit up and I almost didn't answer, but something in me did. "Verena?" The voice hit me like a warm breeze in winter. It had been years. "Dr. Calder?" I said, straightening up a little. "I haven't heard your voice in—" "Too long," he said gently. "I saw the news. You looked composed, but tired. Are you okay?" There was no performance in my voice when I said, "No, not really." A pause. Then, "I'm hosting the Foundation Gala next week. You should come. People need to see the real you, not just the headlines." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked down at my hands, covered in pollen and petal fragments. I nodded slowly, even though he couldn't see me. "I'll think about it," I said softly. We talked for a few more minutes. About nothing and everything. And when I hung up, I felt a sliver of something I hadn't felt in a while. I looked at the pile of torn blooms, and something in me shifted. I wasn't going to let Frances define this moment. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. So I pulled out my laptop, found the florist she used, same vendor from the party, and placed an anonymous order. 10 arrangements, same palette, same flowers. Only this time, they were going to the hospice where my mother had stayed during her final days, the place no one from Logan's family had ever visited. I included a simple note. In memory of kindness, may beauty find those who offer none. I whispered to no one, this is what grace looks like. It wasn't revenge, not exactly. It was reclamation of my name, my choices, my peace. And yet, as the evening stretched on and shadows lengthened across the windows, I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was coming, something colder. I poured a glass of water and walked over to the window. The skyline blinked back at me, indifferent and eternal. I told myself I'd handled it, that I'd moved past it. But I had no idea what Frances was planning for the gala, until I saw the guest list. 2 days had passed since the box of crushed petals and the mocking invoice arrived. I hadn't told anyone about it. Not Logan, not my assistant, not even the florist who came to deliver fresh arrangements to the hospice wing where my mother once took her last breaths. That silent act had brought me peace. Briefly. But that calm shattered the moment I opened the official seating chart for the gala. It had been sent via courier, sealed in heavy parchment with the Grayson Foundation's gold insignia. My eyes scanned the list once, then again. My name wasn't there, not under Grayson, not under my own, but Logan's was. Logan Grayson, attending solo. Solo. The word stung more than I'd expected, not because I craved his company at that stage, but because of what it signaled. Publicly, officially, legally, socially, I had been erased. I sat back in my chair, the soft hum of my office quiet except for the buzzing in my ears. I flipped to the back of the program where each board member was listed with their respective guests and contributions. My title? Gone. My chairmanship on the gala's education subcommittee? Gone. Even the grant I personally secured last quarter, now attributed to Frances, under a neatly edited footnote. I picked up the phone, dialed the event coordinator directly. She answered with a chirpy voice, Grayson Events, this is Monica. Hi, Monica. This is Verena Grayson. I just received the guest list. There's been a mistake. There was a pause. Paper shuffled on the other end. One moment. I have the updated file here. Oh. Actually, this version was finalized by Frances Grayson directly. I was told not to make any amendments. Excuse me? She confirmed everything personally. I believe she said something about keeping things elegant and concise this year. I thanked her and hung up before I said something I'd regret. My hands were shaking, not with panic, but with the clarity that sometimes comes only from a cut so deep it finally hits bone. I thought that was the end of it, until Abigail, one of the junior interns I mentored last year, forwarded me a clip with the subject line, Verena, you okay? It was a video. Frances at what looked like a pre-gala brunch, glasses clinking in the background, soft music, laughter. She raised her flute of champagne and said to the circle around her, Let's try to keep it elegant this time. No mismatched charity cases at the table. Agreed? Everyone laughed. My stomach flipped. I wasn't just excluded. I was the joke. My outfit from the engagement party, remembered as soft rose silk, had been rebranded online in a meme posted by Lily, a family friend. It featured a salmon fillet with a pearl necklace wrapped around it, captioned, grilled and still underdressed. The image had already racked up thousands of likes and laughing emojis. At first, I sat completely still, letting the humiliation wash over me. Then I did what I always do. I looked for answers. I texted Logan. Just one message. Did you approve this? The bubble turned to read, but no reply. I sent another. So this is how you want it? Nothing. I stared at my phone until the screen dimmed. His silence used to feel like avoidance. Now it felt like permission. Permission for them to shut me out. Permission for Francis to treat me like a stain on their perfect linen. Permission for the world to laugh at me while he said nothing. I closed my laptop. The room felt too quiet, my body too still. So I stood, walked to the window, and watched the lights of the city flicker against the dusk. Somewhere, someone was preparing a gown for the gala. Somewhere, Frances was rehearsing her speech, likely with my words copied into her note cards. Somewhere, Logan was likely sipping his third scotch while telling himself, "It's easier this way." But here, in this moment, I realized something. I wasn't part of their story anymore. And that was freedom. They didn't erase me. They freed me. By sundown, I had made my decision. I would attend the gala, not for them, for me, for the girl who used to believe in institutions and honesty, for the woman who stitched herself together through every insult, every sideways glance, every backhanded compliment. I didn't need a table. I didn't need a title. I needed my name and the strength to carry it without their approval. I opened my closet, not to choose something new, but to find something meaningful. A tailored midnight blue gown from years ago, simple, quiet, unapologetically mine. I laid it across the bed like an old friend. Then I called an old friend, the stylist I hadn't worked with since before I married into the Graysons. "I'm attending the gala Friday," I said calmly. "But I want no sparkle, no glitz, no distractions." "What do you want to say?" she asked. I paused, then replied, that I was never part of their story. But I wrote my own. I hung up and whispered, to no one in particular, "You can't erase someone who never signed your rules." The wind outside brushed against the glass like a reminder. I wasn't broken, not this time. And when I walked into the gala that night, every head turned, but not for the reason they expected. I didn't need a spotlight, just a doorway. And when I stepped through it, everything stopped. Forks hovered midair. Conversations cut off like someone had hit mute. Even the string quartet wavered before catching themselves. I stood still at the entrance to Grandcrest Hall, letting the silence do what Francis never could, make space for me. I was wearing a gown the color of tarnished silver, stitched by an old friend of mine, Morel, an independent designer out of Baltimore whom Francis once publicly dismissed as too ethnic, too edgy, too unpolished for society events. Funny how time and humility stitch better seams than silk ever could. Morel's design hugged my frame like it had been molded to my scars. Beside me stood Roland Hatcher, chairman of the Grayson Foundation Board. Not Logan. Roland, tall and quiet, gave a small nod to the security guard frozen at the velvet rope. "She's with me," he said. That was all it took. The rope lifted. My heels clicked against the polished marble floor like clock hands counting down to something none of them were ready for. Logan was near the bar. I saw him stiffen before he even turned. Frances, her mouth twitched into something between surprise and dread. Her eyes flicked to Roland, then back to me, like she was recalculating the stakes in real time. "Verena," Logan's voice cracked in my direction, but I didn't stop. A young staffer in a black blazer approached with a clipboard and a hesitant smile. "Ms. Grayson, miss, would you follow me? We have a seat for you, just over here." I already knew what was coming. She led me across the ballroom, not toward the head table with Logan and Francis, but to a lonely little setup next to the swinging service doors, where the clinking of trays and the murmur of kitchen orders played backup to my humiliation. Francis was suddenly there, like a shadow. "We did our best," she said with a syrupy smile. "This gala came together so last minute. I'm sure you understand, Verena. After all, you're used to adjusting." The way she said adjusting made it sound like I was the one who'd shown up without a name, a title, or a purpose. The crowd around us laughed, uneasy, polite, the kind of laugh people give when they're waiting to see how deep the cut will go. I looked at the seat. Then I looked at Francis, and I walked away. But not toward the exit. Instead, I made my way toward the podium near the center stage. The current speaker, someone from the Foundation's PR team, had just wrapped up a bland toast about community and legacy. Perfect timing. I stepped onto the platform, heels silent now on the velveted steps, and took the mic without asking. Roland had followed, and with a single nod, gave me permission that no one else dared to. A hush fell over the hall again. I didn't smile. I didn't preface. I didn't ease into it. I held up a folder. "This is not a speech," I said evenly. "It's a document. A complete ledger of the Grayson Foundation's donor contributions for the past 6 years, tonight's event, and 5 galas before it, funded in large part by a single entity." I turned the first page. The projector screen lit up behind me, an automatic sync to the mic input, just as I'd arranged with Roland. The numbers weren't flashy, but the name at the top of each transfer was V. Rose Trust, I said calmly. "That's me." A gasp moved across the room like a wind. A few people turned to look at Logan. He wasn't looking back. For years I've been told, subtly, overtly, cruelly, that I wasn't one of them. Not a true Grayson, not polished enough, not born enough. And yet, this outsider, this charity case, as someone recently said, has been the single largest financial support to this organization since 2018. I let the moment hang. I'm not here for applause. I'm here to announce that starting tonight, the V. Rose Foundation will operate independently, with a dedicated fund supporting small business grants for working-class women entrepreneurs. Applause began, tentative at first, then fuller, warmer. Some people stood. I glanced down at Frances. Her lips were pressed so tightly together they had no color left. "And to those who inspired me," I said slowly, "thank you. Even those who tried to erase me. You taught me the value of self-definition. You can't erase someone who was never written in your language to begin with." Frances stepped forward like she was about to shout something. Her hand lifted, indignant, but Logan grabbed her wrist. It wasn't forceful, but it was firm, and he didn't let go. The crowd was watching now, not clapping anymore. Just watching. I took a breath. I reached into the folder again and pulled out a second envelope, sealed with a firm red tab. I turned to the mic one last time. "And now, if you'll excuse me, there's someone else who'd like to speak." I handed the envelope to the lawyer seated just behind the board, one of the original trustees of the foundation. Frances turned white as I handed the mic to the lawyer, and Logan looked like he'd seen a ghost. The hush that fell across the room wasn't gentle. It had weight to it, like a sudden winter fog rolling in over warm earth, the kind that silences everything, even your breath. The man beside me adjusted his glasses, then stepped forward with a small nod. "Good evening," he said into the mic, his voice calm but firm. "My name is Leonard Kravitz, and I am legal counsel for Mrs. Verena Rios Grayson." There it was, my full name, the one they all tried to erase or twist into shame. "I've been authorized to disclose, in accordance with Article 8 of the Grayson Family Trust," he continued, "that effective immediately, Mrs. Rios Grayson holds majority control of all voting shares via a proxy transfer granted by the late Ernest Grayson, grandfather of Logan Grayson." Gasps ricocheted across the ballroom like glass shattering. I didn't need to look to know who dropped their champagne. I could hear Frances's voice before she even opened her mouth. "This is absurd," she snapped, marching closer. "That document is a forgery. You can't just—" Leonard didn't flinch. "Mrs. Carrington, please remember that you are under an active restraining order due to verified instances of harassment and defamation against my client. I urge you to remain seated, for your own sake." She froze mid-step. It was the first time I'd ever seen her at a loss. Her mouth worked, but nothing came out. Her eyes darted around, looking for support, but even Logan had taken a step back. "And as for Mr. Logan Grayson," Leonard went on, turning slightly, "you signed over your remaining voting rights during a financial crisis 4 years ago. The contract was legal, witnessed, and filed. You may have forgotten, but paper never does." Logan's head dropped. His shoulders sagged in that quiet way men do when they've realized they bet against the wrong future. I took the mic back. I didn't speak right away. I just stood there, letting the silence grow legs, letting the moment breathe. Then I walked, slowly, across the room. The train of my gown whispered across the polished floor. All eyes followed as I reached Logan. He looked up at me like a child caught in a lie. I pulled my wedding ring from my finger, not with anger, not even with sadness, just clarity. "You once told me I didn't belong at this table," I said, soft but steady. "Turns out I built it." I placed the ring in his hand. His fingers didn't close around it. Then I turned to Frances. She hadn't moved. "You erased my name," I said. "But you forgot something. I never needed your list. I've always had my own." She blinked, but she didn't speak. And then, right on cue, the back doors to the ballroom opened. A man in a deep navy suit stepped in, composed and quiet. Not flashy, just solid, grounded. Calvin. He didn't walk fast, didn't make a scene. He simply made his way through the crowd like he belonged there, and he did. More than half the guests already knew him. They just didn't know he was with me. He stopped beside me and gently took my hand. His warmth settled into my palm like home. Frances's voice cracked. "You're married to him?" I smiled, not with pride, not with smugness, just relief. "For 2 years." Gasps again. Murmurs rippled. "I never needed Logan," I added. "I just needed to finish what I started." Calvin squeezed my hand, grounding me in the present. Leonard spoke again. "The foundation will undergo a transition over the next 90 days. New leadership will be installed. A separate initiative, the V. Rose Foundation, will focus exclusively on women-led startups from underserved communities." I nodded to the board chairman, who raised his glass discreetly. Beside him, my friend, the designer Frances once mocked, stood tall in her simple, beautiful suit. She smiled, small and proud. Calvin and I stepped down from the stage. We didn't need to stay for the applause that never came. We had said what needed to be said. As we passed Logan, he reached out, just slightly. "I never meant to..." But I didn't let him finish. "You meant everything you did," I said. "And so did I." We left the hall hand in hand, not with a bang, but with the steady grace of people who know who they are now. Outside, the air was cooler, quieter. Calvin opened the car door for me. "You okay?" he asked as I slid in. I nodded. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. But I said everything I needed to. He smiled, then took the driver's seat beside me. Sometimes the loudest justice is done in silence, with the truth, with grace, and with no one left to shout over. Have you ever been erased from your own family's story, only to come back and write the ending yourself? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone.